As the immigration landscape continues to evolve, the EB-2 National Interest Waiver remains one of the most powerful pathways for highly skilled professionals to secure permanent residency in the United States. But which industries and professions stand out? How can we craft applications that maximize approval chances? That's precisely what we'll explore in this session, and we couldn't have a better expert to guide us than Seth Finberg. Seth is a highly respected U.S. immigration attorney based in South Florida, specializing in employment-based immigration for professionals in aerospace, technology, and other cutting-edge fields. His expertise is focused on EB-2 national interest waivers as well. And in today's session, he'll help us break down why aviation, tech, oil and gas, and other high-demand sectors are particularly well-suited for the EB-2 NIW in today's economy. And he'll help us provide insights into building strong applications that meet the new high bar and standards and scrutiny for approval. Thank you so much for joining us today, Seth. I'll see you back at the Q&A. Feel free to take the stage.
All right. Thank you, Joshua. Good afternoon, everyone. And finally, we're at the end of the conference, so I'm really looking forward to closing things out today. And just like immigration is always flowing, I had to move to a different office today because they were doing construction at my office in Fort Lauderdale. So I'm in a little bit of a different setup than I was used to, but we adapt and we make things work, just like with the practice of law. Just to introduce myself, my name is Seth Finberg, and I'm a U.S. immigration attorney. I'm based in South Florida in Fort Lauderdale, but we also have offices up in Orlando as well, and we handle clients nationwide and worldwide via virtual appointments. Okay, so I'm ready to start the presentation with the slides. So there's a little picture there from a little while ago. And okay, yeah, let's start with this one. All right, so a lot of you are here for the EB-2 NIWs. What I want to talk about first is it's actually a split. It's the word, it's EB-2 and then it's NIW, or National Interest Waiver. And those are actually two things. So how do you first have to qualify for the EB-2 before you can even move on to the National Interest Waiver part. So with the EB-2, you either have to have an advanced degree or go the exceptional ability route. Now with my clients, I represent a lot of pilots. The vast majority of pilots do not have an advanced degree. A lot of them don't even have a bachelor's degree. So they're almost always having to go the exceptional ability route. But if you're in other fields, other sectors, such as engineering, some of the tech fields, you're more likely to have an advanced degree, such as a master's or a doctorate. So when you first want to qualify for your EB-2, if you have an advanced degree, it basically has to be, as the slide says, a U.S. master's or its equivalent. So if you have a foreign degree, I always recommend you have your degree evaluated, just to make sure it's equal to a U.S.-based master's degree. But there's a second way to also qualify for the advanced degree, and this is how a lot of my pilots also can qualify for their EB-2, and that's what I call the bachelor's plus 5. So if you have a bachelor's degree, which is an accredited U.S. bachelor's degree or a foreign equivalent, and then at least 5 years of progressive work experience in your field, you can potentially qualify under the advanced degree category for your EB-2. If you don't have that advanced degree, then we got to go exceptional ability, and that makes it a little bit harder. So if you're representing a client who does not have an advanced degree, or you're not sure if they're going to qualify under the advanced degree category, you also often have to consider the exceptional ability area. Okay, we can move to the next slide. All right, and now here's where I add a little bit of my own personality to the presentation. I'm a big sports fan. I'm a former, I guess still current soccer player. I don't do bicycle kicks. I'm a goalkeeper, so I don't do those kind of things. But I can recognize it when I see it, though. And exceptional ability, as I joke, you don't have to be able to, do a bicycle kick or hit a half-court basketball shot, shot or a 360 dunk. You don't have to be that amazing. It's actually not as hard as extraordinary ability. But exceptional ability means you have to demonstrate at least 3 categories of exceptional ability, but they're actually very reasonable a lot of the time. So the first one I want to cover is just 10 years of full-time work experience. If your client or you have 10 years of experience in your field, full-time working, that usually works to satisfy one of the categories. So you want to make sure you cover that in your application. Evidence of a high salary. This is trickier. Sometimes you just know it when you see it. if you're a pilot and you make an exceptional amount of money, maybe in business or executive aviation, if you're a petroleum engineer and you're from, let's say, the Middle East, and you just have a huge salary, that is often evidence of high salary or high other compensation. If your salary is slightly higher than average, you can try to submit evidence for it, but again, it doesn't always work. I do encourage clients and whoever is applying for these petitions, though, to try for multiple categories. All you need to get is 3. And so I wouldn't just try for 3 unless you're absolutely certain that you're going to have 3. So I would probably go for maybe 4 or 5 if you can. All you need is 3, though. Okay, so the next one is recognitions, achievements, or significant contributions in your field. So if you've won awards, if you've got recognitions of certain accomplishments, if you've made major breakthroughs in your field or for your company, these are things you want to list under exceptional ability. Another thing, which is one of the easier ones that I like to use, is just academic record. Let's say you don't have a bachelor's degree, or maybe you don't have the bachelor's plus 5. Submit your bachelor's degree. If you have an associate's degree, submit that. If you've got other licenses, certificates, anything that shows just some kind of academic record or academic achievement, put that in. Some additional training you've received, that would help. And then another one, which is popular to use for certain professions, if you're a member of a professional association, basically a member of things like unions or trade organizations, those can often be helpful. But I have recently been seeing requests for evidence where the USCIS is sort of challenging how easy it is to become a member of these organizations or memberships. So if it's not all that impressive, recent trends show it may not necessarily work, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't try. Okay, next slide. All right. Now, this is a common term that a lot of people don't understand. When we talk about the EB-2 NIW, this is now the NIW part. So for the first 2 slides, we're just talking about qualifying for the EB-2. I'm just going to backtrack just a moment, stay on the same slide, but there's something called EB-2 PERM. So a lot of you have heard of PERM, we're getting a permanent labor certification or just a labor certification. EB-2 PERM is a popular route to get your green card. There's also EB-3 PERM. But if you want to do EB-2 PERM, which I'm not really talking about today, but EB-2 the same way, you've got to qualify under the advanced degree or exceptional ability. But here we're focusing just on the national interest waiver. So we assume you've already gotten your EB-2 part done, or else you're not even going to move on to the NIW from the USCIS perspective. So we're at that stage, we're at the NIW part, and we're talking about the proposed endeavor. That basically is your plan. What do you plan to do in the United States? What do you offer the United States? What have you done, and what will you continue to do here? Or even make further advancements, in your own profession. And that is really what we want to talk about. Why it's important as well. It helps to have something that is meaningful, is helpful, is needed in the United States and even worldwide as well. So talk about that. And then I like to say why you are the right person for the job. It might be a great idea. It might sound amazing and be, incredibly important and very, very urgent, but can you do it? And so you've got to prove to the USCIS that you can do it. And that's where the second prong of DONISAR comes in, which is the well positioned to advance the proposed endeavor. So meaning you are well positioned to do what you plan to do in the United States. So I like to joke, I'm going to send people to Mars. Let's say that's your proposed endeavor. It's not that believable. Maybe Elon Musk can do it. Maybe he can't. We don't even know what year. It might be by 2030, 2040, who knows? Maybe never. But if the more believable your proposed endeavor is, the more likely that the USCIS will agree with your NIW plan. Okay, we can move to the next slide. Okay, so some of you are here for pilots. Some of you are pilots or work with them or know them. Pilots are tricky. It's one of the, I'd say, harder areas of NIW work. It's what I do specialize in. But, we get a lot of requests for evidence. We get more denials than we'd like. But again, we're always evolving ourselves to make the presentation more effective, find the best way to show who you are as a pilot, as an engineer, as a researcher, any field like that. What used to happen a lot more often than now is you could just cite the pilot shortage. You could cite, labor shortages in almost any profession, and that would really help your case. Recently, that's not working much at all anymore. Do I still mention it? Sometimes, but if it's the vast majority of your case, I would not think you have a very strong case if really all you're doing is citing the pilot shortage. But often in denials, or more often than not, requests for evidence, the USCIS will ask, how can one pilot make a difference? And that's hard. You really have to show how you are making a difference. And it's not just flying your plane back and forth safely, transporting passengers and cargo and other things. I mean, sometimes you get lucky and that works, but often you've got to show more than that. So you've got to have some extra skills, extra experience, extra talents that the average pilot doesn't have. And that's really the trick, to find out what those are. And maybe you don't have them right now, but how can you develop them? And so you can talk with your attorney. I talk to clients all the time and try to find out ways to make them stand out more. Sometimes halfway through our case, we pivot a little bit. We find out more information that I didn't even know, and we use that. Sometimes at the RFE stage, you get a request for evidence, and then you realize, well, I need to add a lot more to this case. So then we start looking for other things that pilot has done that we didn't even think were all that important or all that unique. That's where you got to go. Making yourself stand out again. You want to, it's almost like the USCIS is expecting you to show extraordinary ability, not just exceptional ability, which isn't fair, and that's not the standard. But we're seeing cases across the different industries that they're having stricter standards than they maybe should. So what does that mean? You've got to prepare a better case than you used to have to prepare, and sometimes that means you've got to be a better candidate than you used to be. But they still get approved. We still take them. We still work hard on them. You just have to spend a little bit more time. And again, the more volume approach for pilots, I don't think that works anymore. You really have to spend the time to creatively create a proposed endeavor for yourself. Okay, next slide. Okay. Oh, you can go back one more. I think there we go. Okay. So crafting a compelling NIW, national interest waiver, having your petition have strong national interest. You really have to emphasize this. How is it important to the United States? So in any field, whether, a lot of the clients I work with are STEM clients, meaning science, technology, engineering, mathematics. If you're in the STEM field, that usually helps your case to some extent. But again, you can't just cite, I'm in STEM, give me my NIW. That just doesn't work. I like to talk about U.S. competitiveness. So how can you make the U.S. more competitive in any specific industry? If it's petroleum, if it's renewable energy, if it's computer engineering, if it's business, it could be your entrepreneurship that you could bring to the United States, anything like that. How can you make the U.S. better? Because we're competing with many other countries in the world. Some of them are our allies and some of them are not so friendly to us right now. Either way, we got to keep the U.S. at the top. And that's what these national interest waivers are for, is to make the U.S. competitive, make it the best, bring the best foreign talent in. Okay, let's talk about some emerging tech, such as AI, artificial intelligence. I like to point that out. If you work in AI, I think that could make your case very interesting right now. AI has only been really out there for a few years, at least on the NIW scene. So we're seeing some good approvals in AI. How long will that last? It's unclear. Will it get tougher to get NIWs in AI next year than this year? Possibly, but you certainly got to try. I also like to talk about urgency, and I don't mean just urgency in filing your case. I like to just talk about how urgent are you needed in the United States. Not just that it's a good idea to have you here, but like right now, we need people with your skills and talents now, soon. So during COVID, if you were a COVID researcher, that was a strong case that things had to be done and dealt with. So any type of, if you have experience in natural disasters, disaster relief, hurricanes, fires, some type of civil engineering to prevent these sort of disasters, that's pretty urgent. I would definitely talk about those things if you have those skills and experiences. Then I talk about perm challenges. I always touch on that a little bit because the whole purpose of the national interest waiver is to bypass the perm process. So perm takes years and it's getting longer every year and more complicated. So the USCIS normally just says, hey, find a job offer and get your employer to sponsor you for perm. Well, that's all good, but that takes years. So sometimes you just have to mention why you're needed now and not 3 years from now, or so often. And I'm seeing more and more of this is clients already have offer letters from U.S. employers. Whether employers who are interested in hiring them are literally already offering them jobs, but saying, as soon as you get your green card or your work visa or whatever, we want to hire you. I do think that helps your case. It seems almost counterintuitive, though, at first, when you say, well, we're asking the USCIS to waive the job offer requirement, yet you have a job offer. You got to be a little, it's a little tricky at how to cover that little distinction. But again, you can just say, hey, there's someone who wants to hire you, but they're not willing and able to wait for perm necessarily for a number of years. Okay, next slide. All right, so now some of you are here for oil, gas, and other tech NIWs. So we talk about emerging technologies, new technologies, technologies that can make our Earth cleaner, safer, more efficient use of natural resources. That's important. I think that almost fits in the common sense argument. A lot of these NIWs just make sense that this is important for the US if you focus on clean or alternative energy types. And then some people ask me this, that the new administration might have a different view on clean or alternative energy, let's say, than the previous administration. Does that affect your NIW case? And I would still say no. I don't think it's at all weakness right now. I still think any officer is going to be independent of politics, and they're going to just look at what you can bring to the United States. And, administrations change, policies change. Even the administration might change their views on things. You never know. But having a forward-thinking plan is a good idea. Okay, so we want to talk about maybe reducing the U.S. dependence on foreign energy, foreign oil, not importing all of our oil, but maybe finding more efficient, cleaner, and safer ways to develop it here. Talk about what you can do. Talk about what you have done. If you're an expert in petroleum from, let's say, the Middle East or Latin America, or even parts of Europe where they have a lot of natural oil and gas production, talk about what you've done over there and what you can do here. Okay, again, I always like to say cheaper, more efficient. If you have a plan that you can show, hey, I can develop this technology. Look what I've done for the past 10 years. I've cut costs by 40%. I've made things refined much faster too, not just more efficient, but quicker. And then one other thing, can it apply to aviation? I think potentially. Aviation is not exactly good for the environment, even though I do work in this field. We know that. So aviation companies, aircraft manufacturers are looking for ways to make the planes more fuel efficient, make the planes have less impact on the carbon footprint, we say, or also just increasing the range of the planes. If you can fly from Los Angeles to Australia and burn less fuel, or just get even further, that's a good proposed endeavor if you are on the engineering side of things. Okay, next slide. All right, now some of you are here about other things besides NIW, EB-2 NIWs. Okay, so there are EB-1A green cards, which I'll be honest are harder to get than EB-2 NIWs, but for the right client, they make sense. I'll talk about those for a few minutes now. Why would you want to apply for an EB-1A? One reason would be country of birth. If you're born in India or even China, there's a really long backlog for EB-2s, which would be the second employment-based preference category. India is many, many years, and China is still a number of years. So you can get an approved I-140 as for an EB-2 NIW and still not get your green card for quite a while. So what do you do in the meantime? Well, some people are considering applying for an EB-1A green card after getting an NIW approval. That's one step. Another step would be being really aggressive and just going straight for the EB-1A first. I don't always encourage this. It really depends on the right candidate, because you really have to have some impressive credentials, not just national interest, but you've really got to stand out and be one of the very best. And so EB-1As are tricky. Certain professions are better for EB-1As than others. If you publish a lot, if you do a lot of research, if you invent, if you win real recognized awards, if you're in entertainment, if you're in athletics, those often are stronger cases and easier to spot. If you're Lionel Messi, pretty easy case. If you're a famous musician from the UK, usually a pretty good case. Harry Styles, I think, would have a strong case, if that's a type of client you work with. If you're a very famous professor, researcher at a very respected university with years of publications and citations. Those are the type of people who often look good for EB-1As. Okay, we can move down to O1s, which are similar to EB-1As. O1s are also extraordinary ability visas, but they are visas, meaning they are not immigrant visas. They are non-immigrant visas. So you can get an O1 and work for many, many years on your O1, but it does not lead directly to a green card. But some of you are very interested in O1s because they are easier to get than EB-1As. And you can get pretty immediate work authorization if you file with premium processing. There's the same list of categories for EB-1s and O1s mainly. There's a lot of overlap. So if you're considering an EB-1, you may want to say, let's try an O1 first, get that approved, see where you go there. And then maybe down the line, you could get an EB-1A. Okay. And then there's perm. I like to talk about perm as the tortoise in the tortoise and the hare stories. The tortoise is slow, it's steady, but it usually works. It may take longer than you want, sometimes longer than you need, but perm at the end of the day is a straightforward process that often is available for most employment-based cases. So don't not consider perm. There's a lot of discussion and excitement over NIWs and EB-1As, but a lot of people are just not really built for NIWs or EB-1As, at least at this stage in their career, maybe 2, 3, 4 years down the line, sure. So don't ever discourage the option of perm. If your employer is willing to sponsor you for perm, take it. If they're even talking about it, talk to them about it. Maybe see if they're interested in doing it, because it is like having an extra ace in your sleeve that at some point you can pull out and use. Many of you hope to bypass perm and then not even deal with it. But again, let's look at EB-1, EB-1A down the line or O1. Okay, we'll move to the next slide. All right. So another thing to talk about, and this is a challenging question that is not always easily answered here, and that's important supporting documents for your EB-2 NIW. Okay. So of course, we talk about reference letters. And how many do we need? There's really no exact answer. It depends on the case. It depends what you're trying to say, who you are. The more experienced you are, you probably can get more letters. If you've been working for 20, 25 years already, you know a lot of people, and there's probably lots of impressive folks who can say good things about you. If you're on the young side, you might really struggle to even get 5 letters, at least good letters. So I like to say 5 to 8. That's kind of my Goldilocks zone. You can definitely go more. You can get to that 10, 12. I wouldn't go too much more than that, because as we learn in this conference, if some of you attend in other sessions, we always wonder how much time the officer even spends looking at your case, how much they're allowed to spend, how much time do they have. So if you present 450 pages of documents and you've got 17 reference letters, are they reading all of them? I don't know. We never really know. But again, you just got to focus on what strengthens your case in a solid but reasonably short enough manner. So 5 to 8 is a good number. Okay, then we talk about professional plans. And Joorney offers those services if you're interested. So it's a way to more cleverly explain your case to the USCIS. If you're an attorney and you don't typically represent a specific type of client, maybe it's the first one you've ever gotten, do you want to try it all by yourself, or do you want to try to use a partner and potentially make the case a little stronger? It's worth considering, in the right circumstances for sure. A business plan is a little bit more specific. I only really encourage these when you are an entrepreneur, or at least have showed some entrepreneur tendencies or real believable interest. A lot of pilots are trying to throw out, business plans, and I think it's hit and miss on those. It really has to work in the right circumstances. If it's believable, if you've got serious business training and you've already done these things in the past and you just want to do it here, then that's where a business plan could work. Or if you're just an entrepreneur in general, in your home country, you've opened stores and run companies and marketed them and successfully showed that you've produced good clients and real results, then that's more likely believable to do here. So you have a business plan, showing what you can do. So if you're a chemical engineer and you want to bring your process, from the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Mexico, or whatever they call it now, that would be a good idea for a business plan. Think about things like that. So talk to your attorney, reach out, see if these services make sense for you. I wouldn't just default them, though. Don't do it just because you think you have to do it. file your case with what you think you need. And if it makes sense in the initial stage, definitely consider it. Sometimes people then will try one at the request for evidence stage, RFE. So if you get an RFE and they want some more information on what you can do, maybe sometimes that's when you want to throw in a professional plan or a business plan if applicable. And then finally, the expert opinion letters. I'm also sometimes cautious about these because you don't want to appear desperate. You don't want to appear that you are just getting an expert letter because you think you need one. Sometimes your case does not need it. I mean, your case could be very strong on its own. And, if you've got some solid references explaining who you are and what you've done, and these references know you, have worked with you, and are impressive on their own, that really will be a lot stronger, in my opinion, at least most of the time, than an expert who has a great name but does not know you at all. However, if you're in a very niche field, though, and there really isn't a lot of public information out there about what you do or have done, and there's someone who has that similar specialty and might really understand you better, that might be worth considering at that point. So expert opinion letters, again, they definitely vary when you need them. Okay, next slide. Oh, that's it. I guess I breezed through this. So I guess there's more time for questions. Before I get to questions, I guess I'll just summarize a couple things that I brought up on the NIW. So I might just do that. I was trying to finish early to leave time for questions, and there probably is plenty of time now. Okay.
Yeah, let me know, Seth. Would you like to jump to the questions or summarize a couple things before you wrap
How
up?
much time do we have left, actually? I haven't been paying attention to the screen.
We have about 20, 25 minutes in total.
Okay, so there's a lot. So I guess for a couple more minutes, I'll just talk about, I'm going to talk about EB-1s a little bit more. I think we could maybe hit those a little bit. EB-1s are, you're seeing a lot of people on social media, LinkedIn, posting about them, how they're necessary or good or more of a better choice for certain people. I think people are being pressured into doing EB-1s when they're not necessarily ready for them. These are extraordinary ability green cards. If you're 26 and you've literally worked for 4 years since college, it's going to be real hard to get an EB-1, even if you are born in India. I mean, sometimes you just want to sit back. I know you want to get the EB-1, but sometimes be realistic. There's nothing wrong with getting an NIW approved first in the right circumstance, because at least it's there, it's done. And then you can build up your profile to more likely go for that EB-1. If you were born in India, I totally understand why you would want to go for the EB-1 right off the bat. But it really matters on what you've won and what you've done. I mean, those rhyme, but it's really like that. If you're an athlete, I like to talk about sports. If you're Connor McDavid they call him Connor McJesus of the Edmonton Oilers. Everyone knows his name. Yeah, that's the easy case. You don't have to be that strong. But some of these people, if you're not even well known at all in your home country, and you're 27, is an EB-1A really the right move at that point? Who knows? Now, I will say there's no harm in trying. If you want to spend the money, spend the time, apply for the case. I'm not discouraging anyone from doing that. It's not the end of the world if you have a case denied. I've had cases denied, and the clients later on can apply again and get it approved. So you got to stay positive, and you got to be a risk taker sometimes. But just be realistic and manage your expectations a little bit. Okay.
Awesome. Let's jump into some questions, Seth. We have quite a few rolling in. Some seem like they might be case specific. If you want to just give some general thoughts on some of those, and other ones are more generalized questions.
Do I need to read them, or are you going to announce them?
No, I'm going to read them for you. You can sit back and relax and answer some questions for us.
Sure.
So our first question was when you mentioned about salaries, kind of seeing them when you know them. But if you have an opinion, what kind of salaries are considered high in the data science field?
Okay. I mean, it also, in my opinion, it really comes down to where you work. So if you're from country A, where the average person, let's say, makes 54,000 US approximately, which might still be a lot in that country, and you make 2 or 3 times that could be a really good evidence of extraordinary or is this for exceptional ability? Would this be for an NIW salary, or this evidence of EB-1? Because those are actually two different things. I guess I'll answer it both ways. If you're doing an NIW, EB-2 NIW as a data scientist, I would just like to see a salary that's substantially higher than the average salary in your home country. Is usually where I like to go. You don't have to compare it to the US, because the US has some of the higher salaries in the world. So if your salary has to be twice what the average American makes, that's very rare. If you have that, congratulations, that's pretty strong evidence. But if you don't, it's not the end of the world. Try it. I mean, don't be afraid to submit the evidence. Most likely they won't. If they don't buy it, they don't buy it. You go for another category. But yeah, I mean, but again, if it's so low, like, then just don't give the officer an excuse to want to deny your case. So if you're not even at the median of your country's average salary base for that field, I would not even submit that as high salary, because it's not. If you play in the second level Bundesliga in Germany, that's soccer, and you're making the league minimum, even though it's still not bad money, that's not evidence necessarily of exceptional or extraordinary ability. But if you're on a top club, top tier team, then yeah, that's where you want to go. All right.
Great. Thank you, Seth. Another question here. Under the advanced degree qualification, do you need to demonstrate that this type of degree is standard for the occupation, or is it enough to show the person holds a degree relevant to the field?
Oh, yeah, that's actually a good question. Because I've actually had clients that have had degrees that are not even related to their field, and we've tried to submit it, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So like, if you're a pilot and you've got a degree in history, it's not really related to your field, unless you have, say, like aviation history. But most likely you're just going to have to show that you're able to write, read, and critically think better than your peers because of your training. So that's probably not what most of you guys are talking about. So if you're talking about you want to work as a data scientist, but you've got more of a straight computer engineering degree, they're pretty related. I don't think, you might get an RFE on it, and they might explain they might ask you to explain the link, which usually can overcome that. So it's not the end of the world. Was there anything else on that question? I don't remember.
No, that was the full question there.
Okay.
Interesting question here related to documentation, and actually one that we get frequently. Love to know your opinion. Do you happen to see a higher approval rate using a business plan rather than a professional plan? And I can tell you, we get asked this question all the time. Some people might opine putting the business idea sounds better than the professional route. If you have an opinion one way or the other, if they both depend on the profile of the candidate.
Honestly, I don't think I've ever been asked that directly, so I don't think I've ever done a study. I'd have to just think of my own experience. But I think I wouldn't just default to a business plan. That's really the best evidence I can give. If it makes sense in your field, do it, because it could help your case. But again, it could look like you don't really have a strong case and you're just throwing some business plan together. And I know attorneys do this, and sometimes it works. I just don't think it's a good move. And I think overall it's going to hurt your case. Again, if you have no basis opening up this business, or it's not even believable, you're going to suddenly, create a $10, $15 million company and hire 35 people. How? I'm just being a little bit real, but you got to show how the likelihood of success, the well-positioned to advanced proposed endeavor. But, if you've got a proven entrepreneur record, even if it's a small company, hey, and back home in Peru, I ran a business with 9 employees for the last 15 years, and we did all this. And in the US, I want to do something twice the size. That's a stepping stone. That's realistic. The professional plan, though, it's not, you don't have to open a business. You just have to say, this is what I want to do. These are the things I can bring. These are the skills I offer. And maybe you can say, I'm going to get better. You're not at the top of your profession. If you're 39 or 42, you've got plenty of years to even get better. So talk about how you can improve your profession as you go on in your career.
Amazing. No, I completely agree. Thank you for that, Seth. And then we've got some questions about the new administration and how things are looking forward. So this person specifically mentioned, how would you emphasize potentially somebody working as like a COVID researcher, an immunologist, but just in general, your thoughts on what the new administration might be thinking with strict scrutiny or putting in place might affect some of these fields?
Okay, well, I mean, we're not like getting into that conspiracy of COVID deniers and all that stuff. We're not.
No.
Yeah.
Certainly not.
But I think the officers are, and a lot of my colleagues I think will agree, are relatively independent. I still think the USCIS on the employment side is much more independent of politics than other areas of immigration law. If you're in removal defense and asylum, that's going to change dramatically and probably already has changed. Employment-based, I think it's going to be a little bit slower. We're still very early on in this new administration, so there's not a ton of evidence about whether they're going to be stricter on any type of cases. I mean, it's not a bad idea to think it could happen. Hopefully not. There definitely are people in the administration who support highly talented foreign individuals coming to the United States. There's a lot of support for that. We need innovators. We need entrepreneurs. We need to remain, competitive with the world and not fall behind. I like to talk about things like that. So if it says an immunologist, I mean, U.S. has some of the best drug research in the world. We have some of the best doctors in the world. And if you're a doctor or a neuroscientist, a chemist, a researcher, these are hot fields that are always needed. I would definitely not discourage any of these filings. Keep going. And I would not be afraid to say, and if you're a COVID researcher, COVID is not gone. It might not be as deadly as it used to be, but it's still around and it's still evolving. So you need to be on top of it. And we need researchers that work with the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, and other university research institutions.
That's a great segue into another question we got here. It asks for EB-2 for pilots. Would you still think it would be beneficial to mention how COVID affected the industry a couple of years ago at this point in time?
I mean, you can mention it because there are a lot of pilots who permanently retired. I mean, I don't know how you temporarily retired, but yeah, I mean, there were pilots who just got out of the business. And some of the most experienced, highly trained ones. A lot of the time they were already in their 50s, early 60s, and they just said, I don't want to deal with these restrictions, or the opposite, I'm just afraid to fly. And they just said, I don't want to take chances. Because as a pilot, you're in touch with people a lot. You're always in airports, you're in many different states and countries. You're vulnerable to getting sick. So for those people who have health concerns, or maybe a close family member has a health concern, there were pilots who just retired. And some of them took more like furloughs or took a few years off. Some came back, some have not. So if the question was, has COVID still affected aviation? I think it has. It's not the strongest argument anymore, no, but I wouldn't just not talk about it if you have some good things to say.
Great. Thanks, Seth. Another question about documentation and reference letters. Do you have any thoughts on how long they should be?
Ooh, that's another good one. I like to say less than 2 pages, ideally. You don't have to keep it to 1 page. I mean, sometimes if they're a person who's pretty impressive on their own, you want to talk about who they are, talk about how they know you. So it's not just like, this is Michael. He's a really impressive British chemist, and he's a great guy, and he'd do wonderful things. I mean, you got to take a little bit more time to describe who Michael is in this letter. And they often do want to know who the reference is. Not just, hi, my name is Sarah, and I'm the vice president of this company in Frankfurt, Germany. Who are you, Sarah? Why does it even matter that you're writing this letter? So yeah, spend a little time there on that. I wouldn't go much past 2 pages, because then you're going to lose their attention. Even if there's all sorts of great nuggets of information in there, by 1.5 pages, 1.75 pages, you probably want to cut it off. That doesn't mean don't send one that's 2.5 pages, especially if you don't, if your reference writes the letter, don't go back to them and say, can you shorten your letter? I really wouldn't do that too much. I would just submit it. If it's 2.25 pages, it's probably fine.
Great. Absolutely. If we have somebody who's applying, let's say they have a master's degree, but they don't necessarily have things like publications or patents. Can you talk about how to look at that person being well positioned if they might not have any extraordinary things like those methods?
Okay, well, patents are specific to some industries. So I think people are always afraid if they don't have patents. You don't need patents. Most of my clients don't have patents. I mean, not even just the pilots, but not most of my non-pilot clients. Very rarely do they have a patent, because a patent takes years to produce. It has to get approved. You have to prosecute it in your own country. I have a little bit of an IP background myself, so I understand a bit more of this, but the patent also has to be useful. Like if it's not even related to your proposed endeavor, you have a patent on some type of, research project from 2004 that's not even used anymore. So what if you have a patent? But again, if you're making all kinds of breakthroughs in your field but don't have any patents, that doesn't mean you're less impressive. If you have the patents, submit them, because the officers often think that's great. So do it. I don't say don't file with them, but if you don't have them, I would not be discouraged. Another thing is if there's a patent pending, let's say you filed for it, I would mention that you filed for it. They might ask, well, has it been approved? You'd have to say no, but it's still better to file for one, and then just show some evidence there. But again, describe what the patent is. Don't just be like, I have 3 patents. Well, what are they for? How useful are they? How valuable are they? Are they being licensed? Are they useful patents? There's tons of patents. You can do research with the U.S. Patent Office, and most of these patents are, how did the U.S. office even approve this thing? They seem pretty silly. All right.
Great. And since January, when we saw some of the new guidelines get released, the new NIW policy, have you changed anything in the way you're scrutinizing applicants or filing your cases under the new guidelines?
I don't tend to follow the guidelines as strictly as some other attorneys do. I read them, I know, but I usually wait for just evidence of the types of cases we get back. That's better to me than guidelines, because officers don't even follow the guidelines sometimes. You cite them, you bring them up, and they often just do what they want to do. So, if STEM is hot, then, talk about it. But, if they're the only good advice I would give here is they're showing more flexibility for entrepreneurs. So if you're an entrepreneur, there's even ways where you can potentially sponsor yourself. I know I'm not talking about H-1B visas in this panel, but that's good progress to show that you don't have to just find an employer. And the same thing with an EB-2 NIW. You might not have an offer letter or a job offer because you're your own job. You're creating your company. You're producing the product yourself. And so showing that entrepreneurial spirit and ability to develop and innovate is always going to be needed. And I like to talk about job creation too, whether you've already done it or can show likely, believable job creation. Yeah.
Amazing. Back to documentation. Any advice on how long to do for a petition letter? How many pages?
You mean a cover letter?
Or... Yeah, I would imagine they're referring to a cover letter.
Again, that depends on the client. I'm actually, you probably can tell, I talk a lot. I write a lot. I can write really long petitions, and sometimes I just get excited and caught in the moment, and I look at my cover letter and I'm at 20-something pages, and I'm like, I got to cut this down. I would probably stick to the high end of probably about 15 pages. Some say keep it under 10. I mean, it depends on how impressive your candidate is and what they've done. If they've got a proposed endeavor that's complicated, you've got to spend the time to explain it. If you're a pilot, you can't just be like, I'm going to fly a plane. They're not going to prove that case. I'm going to cure cancer. I'm a chemist. Well, really? How? What have you done? So take time and explain your developments. And the one thing about these cover letters, though, don't be too technical. You don't have to impress them and write like you're writing in a graduate level journal. This is a USCIS officer who might not even have a huge science background. So you want to keep the language relatively simple, not 4th grade level or anything that a kid would read, but something that most people can at least understand, or if they have to take a few minutes to look up something, it's not the most challenging subject matter. I would probably not keep things too short, but maybe in that 5 to 15 page range is probably what I call the Goldilocks zone.
That's great advice. And one thing we always think as well with the work that we do is think about the audience of the person who's reading the document and what their background might be. So that's great advice. Absolutely. I loved your slide on proposed endeavor. We get people asking us frequently as well, what should my proposed endeavor be? One of the questions here is, do you think there are any mistakes that one can make when it comes to a proposed endeavor? Do you have any tips on how to avoid that piece of the puzzle failing?
Yeah, that's actually a good question too. Not a simple answer either. You don't want it to be too too short and too narrow because it's not important enough. You don't want it to be something that, I am going to make U.S. ground transportation safer. Well, how? If you're, let's say, a civil engineer and you design roads or design railroads or something like that, your urban planning, that you want to explain it so that, because they can visualize this. They know, well, we want our roads safe for sure. But you have to maybe break it down in a few points of your proposed endeavor and say that, I'm going to do this thing and this thing and this thing. And all together, they will help safety, or they will help efficiency, or whatever you're working on. What was the other part of that question?
Just how, any tips on showing the proposed endeavor, how to avoid any mistakes that you see with how people do approach relating their proposed endeavor?
Well, I'll actually say something. I guess it's kind of funny. One of the good things about a request for evidence, obviously you don't want to get them, but we get them a lot. So they give you an opportunity to kind of change your strategy a little bit. So, it's kind of like a timeout. It's like halftime. Now getting an RFE, I like to make this argument. It's like being down at halftime. I love soccer. I play, I coached and all that. So it's like being down maybe 1-0 or 2-1. You can overcome it. You'd rather be up, but if you get an RFE, you're not up at halftime. You're down, but you're not down 6-0 unless you have this ridiculously challenging RFE. But it gives you an opportunity to regroup. A lot of teams come back from the second half and win the game. And then, win your green card, win your case. That's what you want. So if you're an attorney or you're working with an attorney, talk to your attorney, and that's when we go over the RFEs. Read every word, read every page, and figure out what they say. Sometimes they're wrong. That's another thing. Sometimes they don't see things in the what you submitted. I'm sure some of our other panelists talked about that. But yeah, it's an opportunity. If they attack your proposed endeavor, that's often what they do. The officer will say why it's not nationally important. That's a big one. Or why it doesn't meet the balancing test. So, okay, it is nationally important, great, but still on merits or on balance, it's not going to merit a waiving the job offer and waiving the perm requirements. So you have to show why your proposed endeavor really matters. And maybe you didn't do a good enough job explaining it. People make mistakes. I filed cases where I get an RFE and go, wow, yeah, I should have done more on this and less on this. So you maybe subtract some stuff here and add some things here.
And that's a good transition into the follow-up question. If you have any tips to showing national importance with the filings that you do.
Okay. So sometimes national importance is where we like to, you can flirt the idea of expert letters potentially. If you think this is where you want to go and show how what you do is nationally important, you might find someone in that field who really knows this stuff and has worked in it. If you're a petroleum engineer and you get an RFE on a case and they're still saying it's not nationally important, and you're saying, how can I show that this is nationally important? What else could it be? That might be the time you want to bring in the big guns. And these are extra costs. That's the thing. You've got to have a budget and figure out what you want to spend going into your case. And if you get an RFE, you've got to decide, what it's going to cost to respond to that RFE and what else you might need. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else to add on that. The important thing about RFEs, though, is there's a time limit. When you file a case from the beginning, you can literally take as long as you want. Now, sometimes, obviously, you don't want to say, I'm going to file this case in 2027, but the difference between filing on March 26th and May 3rd is not a huge difference if you can make your case better. So don't rush to file anything. But in RFE, you've got that up to 60, whatever days it is. You don't have the time. You want to complete it early enough so you can mail it, make sure it gets in on time, and not have to push any deadlines like that. So you have to make decisions sooner rather than later in this process. Don't take a month before you even look at your RFE. Or if you file, here's another thing that happens. A lot of my clients will file on their own. They won't even know that. I've never talked to them. I have no idea who they are. They get their case, they get an RFE, sometimes even a denial. Then they come to me. But if you come to me or come to any other attorney who's busy and does a lot of these cases, we need time to read over the RFE, look at your case, prepare a good response. It's a lot harder at the RFE stage if we don't know you. They'll literally send you in an email a 119-page document and say, this is what I filed with the USCIS. Look it over and tell me how I need to make it better. That takes hours. not 15 minutes. So it can be time consuming. It can be costly. So it's always better to, plan ahead as early as possible. Okay.
In a lot of those instances, we hear the question, is it better to attack those RFEs, respond to those RFEs, especially if they might be lengthy or more complex, or do a refiling? Is there something that pushes you one way or the other when seeing those types of situations?
Okay. I'm a fighter, so I don't like to give up. Maybe it's the ex-soccer player in me. I just never give up. So I rarely withdraw cases, especially ones I started and worked on. I mean, I don't know if that's being just having too much pride, but most of the time it's just like, I know I can beat almost any case.
Sure.
So I'm not afraid of an RFE. The only time is I've had clients that filed and they had no business filing. They're just too young. I say too green. Why did you file an NIW at this stage in your career? I look at the RFE and it literally attacked every single point that you've submitted. At that stage, I might just be, I know you paid your filing fee and everything, but this is an unbeatable RFE. And maybe it's just not worth the time to respond. I mean, there's really no risk. If you're doing it on your own, just respond to it. I mean, I don't think having a denial on your record is the end of the world. But if you're looking at a 95% chance of denial, at that point, maybe you should just wait a little bit, refile, or refile better. Take 3-4 more months and recraft your case, because getting a fresh start is often a much higher chance of success. When I say refile, though, I don't mean refile the exact same case. No, that's not what I do. Some people do that, and maybe it works. Good luck. But I mean, like, change it. The RFE is often a tool to just look at prospective weaknesses in your case. Look at those topics that they brought up, because most officers are similar, and they're going to tell you where you're weaker most of the time and where you're strong. And that's when I look at that for refile.
We have a lot of questions coming in. Unfortunately, only a couple more minutes, so I'm going to try to join two in that are kind of related. And to everybody else, a lot of these seem like they might also be case specific, so please note that we are providing Seth's contact information if you want to reach out to him and see if he can help you with any of these questions as well. So two questions here that kind of relate to each other. Apart from citations or publications, what else could be considered an academic record of accomplishment? And then also for a fresh master's graduate without publications or significant contributions, is there an easy way to demonstrate this person is well positioned?
Okay, well, a lot of it is just, you can go on your potential. I guess the second question was, if you're fresh out of grad school, but you've done a lot of stuff in grad school, or you had work before your master's degree, that's often key. If you're just a straight student, you graduated from high school, went straight to college or university, got your bachelor's, and then went straight to your master's and really have no work experience, that's harder. That's a harder sell, because you really haven't done much. If you're a lawyer and you've never worked, I mean, recent law grads are smart and they're obviously well trained, but I'd rather have someone with a few years of experience personally. This is not an immigration question. I just meant real life, but but if you don't have a lot of citations, that's okay. I mean, most of my professions that I work with are not what I call academics. You don't do research, you work, you produce things. So you don't have to worry about citations unless you're in an academic field. If you're in an academic field, then they expect that. If you're a PhD or postdoc or graduate level researcher, then yeah, you probably want to have some citations, or what are you going to offer? Because you've never worked. All you've done is taught and researched. But if you've worked as an engineer for 12 years, there's a good chance you never wrote anything. You just worked and designed products, and you made awesome things. And that's what matters.
Awesome. With the quick 1 minute we have left, Seth, I'm going to ask you one more question.
Okay.
Can you give us your opinion on expert letters from third-party companies that people are paying for and receiving from maybe a professor? Do you think that they add value to national importance in specific?
I think it's hit and miss. I mean, it raises the cost to your case, but most people are willing to pay, so that's really not the issue. I've had cases denied with really good expert letters that I was shocked that were denied, because I looked at that letter and this letter's good. It's worth, so it really varies. You also, though, don't want to appear desperate. If your case is not that strong, an expert letter, I think, is a red flag. But if your case is strong and that you just need a little bit more to push you over the finish line, that's really where you want the expert letter, I think, more often than not.
Amazing. And with that, unfortunately, we're out of time. With much of our EB-2 NIW webinars that we put on previously, having an expert like Seth usually increases the amount of questions that we get rolling in. And these are always great discussions to continue. We'd love to have Seth back again in the future. And of course, please do feel free to reach out to him. Seth, please let us know if you have any parting words. We really appreciate your participation.
All right. Well, yeah, thank you everyone for coming. I mean, this is obviously a hot topic and it's complicated. A lot of these questions are great and they're hard to answer just in 30 seconds or a minute. But a lot of the time, if you're interested, contact me. There's a lot of other great immigration attorneys that are my colleagues that do a lot of these similar cases too. And so, find someone you're comfortable with, that you get along with. Remember, because you're going to be spending a good amount of time with this person and their staff. So get to know them, find out who you're most comfortable with. And then it's an investment in your future. So you have to decide if this is something that you really want and really need. If you're 50-50 on it, maybe don't do it right now, wait a little bit. But if you're ready to go, now's the time. I wouldn't say wait. Yeah.
And Seth, if you could see the chat right now, there's a lot of applause,
Oh, thank
emojis
you.
going off for you. So looks like your presentation was much appreciated, and we thank you for being part of the summit.
Thank you.